Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Boston Sprinter route. This time I figured I'd revisit the special Phase 3/TSW2 advert ACS-64 and do a run, or an evening run, from Providence to Boston, specifically on Northeast Regional Train 176, which, if I'm not mistaken, was the very same service that the real thing ran on her first day in this special livery. From what I saw in the footage of the real thing, there were a lot of people gathered, especially at Route 128, to watch this thing. And I can't imagine that'll be the case this time, but regardless, I still thought it would be fun to try and recreate a specific server or a specific engine on a specific service. Yeah, I'm just making sure this engine is set up, and I don't really want to end up in a situation where we're due to depart and I can't get the brakes released or anything. Now, I seem to recall there was a brake key somewhere. Brake mode, trail. Ah, that'll be it. That brake mode dial or whatever it was. But no, this is as has always been the case with Northeast Regional services. We'll only be stopping at, after we leave Providence, we'll only stop at Route 128 and Boston Back Bay, and then we'll of course end at Boston South. Now, I don't remember for certain, but I think I did set the weather to foggy for this run because I figured it would make for a semi-interesting challenge, even though you've got these cheats with like the speed limit indicators and what have you, which you would certainly never have on the real thing. Right, now I don't drive with like the alerts. Whenever I drive this thing, I don't have like the alerter or ACS enabled. Generally because I just find it a bit annoying. Find this stuff a bit annoying to have to try and work with. So yeah, I mean, the same goes for the setup on the Long Island Railroad, come to think of it. Right, well, as we leave Providence, we may be going very slow, but it won't be too long before we can get this thing to well past the ton. And I think I'll have the windows closed for this run because sometimes the noise of the wind rushing past can get a bit overwhelming, for me at least. That's the point. This is one of those setups where the ditch lights flash whenever you blast the horn. Thus, I also don't like it when when it's set up that the bell triggers at the same time as the horn, and especially since the MBTA F40PH-3C that comes with the same route as the ACS-64, that does not have that same thing where the bell is triggered at the same time as the horn, and I don't understand why that inconsistency is present. I don't understand why it's not consistent even with the two engines in the same route together. Anyway, that's enough whinging for now. I'm trying to focus on what we're actually here for. One thing's for sure is that I'm not used to driving at night, but one thing I do know is that in real life, when you're driving a train or a locomotive at night, you don't go like this with the cab light on, because from what I think the reason why they always have the cab light off is because it hinders the driver's ability to read the signals. Those red signals there are not ours, mind. Although I'm not sure why that one there is yellow. What that's saying is coming up. I mean, I can't imagine we're following an MBTA service, and even then I would have thought that an Amtrak one would be given priority. Then again, I don't know for certain. I mean, I know that for the most part Amtrak does own the Northeast Corridor, but I'm pretty sure that the Metro North Railroad, or somewhere I've heard, owns the section between New York and New Haven. which to me is a little odd, because I would have thought that Amtrak would own the entire route between Washington DC and Boston. Goes to show you how much I know about American railways, or railroads I suppose. Oh no, there's a freight yard. Oh no, that's a those are carriage sidings, and there was an MBTA F40 with some CTC3 coaches, no, BTC3 coaches and the CTC3 cab car. I have no idea what that siding's name is. I dare say that it's one of those cases where they store trains there overnight. Yeah, certainly can't see all that well, even with the headlights as bright as they can be. Right, okay, now why would we be getting yellow signals? And yeah, the other reason why I generally don't drive with the cab signalling enabled is because more often than not it completely destroys the punctuality of your service. And like I know that you're supposed to try and travel at the speed indicated on the little screen, but it's still when it's enabled, it still expects you to do that at the expense of potentially running severely late. And I don't know about you, but I don't like to run late. At least the frame rates are pretty good for the most part. Mind you, there's barely any colours that the game has to render, so that's probably why it's running so smoothly. And as it stands now, I can't really remember what the frame rates are like up at Boston South, but from memory it wasn't too bad. I seem to recall one time I tried doing a run from Boston South to Stoughton with the MBTA F40, and it was going well for the most part, but then I've got onto the Stoughton branch itself, and then the game started constantly lagging. And I'm not joking when I say this, that was perhaps the angriest I'd ever got at this game. And I ended up having to redo that trip, and in the end it did run smoothly. Wait, so hold on a second. I'm a bit confused as to why we had all those yellow signals back there just past that yard where the MBTA consist was, and now it looks like we'll have greens again. Oh, there's a yellow one. Well, what on earth is going on? Surely at some point we'll be able to get this thing up to 125 miles an hour. I think there's at least one section on this route where the speed limit goes up to 150 miles an hour, but of course that is sort of useless for that means nothing to the two engines that come with this route, because the MBTA F40 that can get up to about 105 miles an hour given enough room, and the ACS-64 here, this thing could easily get up to 125. But I'm not entirely sure what the maximum design speed of this thing is. I mean, for all I know, it could be like the Class 390 Pendolino in the UK, a train that has a top design speed of 140 miles an hour, but due to the infrastructure limitations of the West Coast Main Line, the 390s can only go up to 125 miles an hour when they're in passenger service. And just going back to that thing with the 150 zone, it was like the Acela. Well, that 150 speed zone was primarily, if not solely, for the Acela, which is currently the fastest train in North America, at least the fastest revenue-earning train. I mean, for all I know, there's probably test trains that can go even faster than 150. But anyway, for the hello, this station. I'm just trying to guess which one it is. I think it's South Attleboro. Anyway, yeah, the Acela, whilst she can get up to 150 miles an hour in passenger service, it's only for an incredibly short and small portion of the overall Northeast Corridor. And I think that one of the only sections where it can do 150 is somewhere between here and Route 128. I mean, good luck trying to get up. I mean, you could theoretically get up to 150 miles an hour north of Route 128, but for all I know, that would probably mean a very sudden and nasty jolt and horrible feeling for the passengers when the train has to slow down very quickly so that it doesn't, or when they go into the Back Bay tunnel, so they don't have a repeat of the accident that happened in 1990. And in that instance, that was when an Amtrak service, I think it was called the Night Owl, I forget where it started from, but it was on its way to Boston, Boston South, and they got into the tunnel, between Ruggles and Back Bay, much faster than they should have been, and they actually tipped over and crashed right into an MBTA consist that was on its way back from Stoughton. The good thing is that no one was killed, which is very impressive, and I would even go so far as to say miraculous. Actually, I mean, whilst no people were killed, 3 locomotives were killed, namely the 2 Amtrak F40s and MBTA number 1073. Of course, this was before, I think this was about 10 or 12 years before the section between New Haven and Boston was finally electrified. And that's something I don't really know I don't really know why it took so long to electrify the NEC past New Haven. Because yeah, for the longest time, trains going between Washington and Boston, or south of Boston and onto the NEC, but branching off to a different destination, would have to be diesel hauled as far as New Haven, and then electrics would take over. In fact, I think there's a route in Train Simulator that is set, that includes New Haven Union Station, but is set in like the early 1950s, like back in the days of the New York, New Haven and Hartford Railroad. Okay, why has the lag suddenly got so bad? Anyway, we're overtaking an MBTA service. Hang about. Wait. Oh, I forgot this was a 4-track section. No, this is now passing through Attleboro, where there's another train stopped there. Yes, I did, for the most part, forgotten that whilst the majority of this route between Providence and Boston is just double track, there are some sections where it goes out to 3 or 4 tracks. I think north of Reedville, it's 3 tracks. Then you got the 2 outer lines and then the one in the middle. And I think it's actually I think each of those tracks, or at least the section through Ruggles, that's got bi-directional signalling. Because normally, at least here in New Zealand, when you get a railway station that has 2 tracks and 2 platforms, usually each platform is only specifically used by trains going in one direction of travel. Whereas at Ruggles, from what I've seen, at least in this Boston Sprinter pack, it doesn't matter which direction the train is going, they can use either of the 2 platforms. And that goes for the 3 platforms at Back Bay. I mean, I say 3, but I'm referring to the 3 that you can access on this route. Because I know for a fact that Boston Back Bay Station isn't just served by Amtrak's Northeast Regional, Acela, Lakeshore Limited, and MBTA's Providence, Franklin and Stoughton lines. There's also, I think, a few other MBTA commuter rail lines and some of the subway routes as well. It probably goes without saying, but I know almost nothing about the MBTA and their rail services around Boston. But what I do know is that they have 2 big grand by American standards, terminus stations in the centre of Boston. And obviously they are Boston North and Boston South. And whilst, from what I understand, there are currently no passenger services that directly connects the 2 stations, but there is apparently a single track line connecting the 2, but that's only used for like empty stock moves, I believe. Another thing I know about Boston North is that at least one Amtrak service connects that or serves that station as well, namely the Downeaster, which goes, I believe that's Boston North to Brunswick, Maine. and actually uses old F40PHs converted into MPCUs. Which reminds me, I once watched a video on YouTube from a channel called, I don't know if any of you have heard of it, it's called, I think, yeah, Simply Railway. And he was doing a trip report video when he did the Down Easter, and in the title and thumbnail he was boasting about how it featured the mighty F40PH, neglecting to mention that the thing that was an F40 that was on the consist technically wasn't a locomotive anymore, and that the motive power was actually coming from, I think it would have been a General Electric P42 DC. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a bit dishonest on his part. That's, in the grand scheme of things, it's only a minor nitpick, because most of his videos aren't too bad. Especially the one I watched recently about this, I think it was the Royal Gorge, or some really fancy train with old 1950s coaches in Colorado. It had like an EMD F7A and F7B on one end and GP40 on the other. And apparently the livery was like the old Rio Grande Empire Builder consist or something of that nature, but to me it looked more like the Western Pacific livery, like what you see on some of those F7As that are preserved in Portola, California. Speaking of the Western Pacific, I basically didn't know about them until I got the Feather River Canyon route train simulator about, Christ, I think it was almost just over 6 years ago now. And that was probably one of the few good memories of 2016, because that was a bloody horrible year. At least that was the case for me. I dare say other people would have had a rotten year as well. And yeah, the Feather River Canyon route and train simulator, I think that just included the line between Oroville and Keddie, plus spurs off down towards Quincy Junction and Quincy, and then another one out towards Crescent Mills. And from what I gather, in the days of Microsoft Train Simulator, there was a route that did include Feather River, like the Feather River Canyon, but actually continued on towards Portola. So in some ways, it kind of makes the Train Simulator version look a bit half-assed. More CSX wagons. I can't tell exactly where we are on the route. It's obviously I can see by looking at the HUD that we're not too far from Route 128. Although I've only got 6 minutes to go 9 miles. I reckon the ACS-64 can do it, and to cover that distance in such a short space of time. It's one of the things about electric locomotives is that generally the acceleration and braking is much better than it is in a diesel. Actually, I'm trying to think like what some of the fastest accelerating diesels are, at least in America, but none come to mind. Right, well, actually, probably the MPI MP32PH-Qs, which run the Sunrail commuter service in Orlando, Florida. Those things have got 3,200 horsepower at least, and yet the Sunrail commuter services, generally they're only made up of 2 coaches, which are Bombardier bi-levels, of course. And actually, for whatever reason, Sunrail has more cab cars than normal coaches. So more often than not, when you'll see a Sunrail train, both coaches will be cab cars, when normally that isn't the case, especially on the Music City Star out of Nashville. But no, I just think it's quite ridiculous that here you are with a locomotive that was actually rebuilt from ex-Mark GP40WH-2s with 3,200 horsepower, and yet you got all that power available, and yet, hello, this is either Sharon or Mansfield Station. You know, with the Sunrail engines, you've got all that power, and yet it's just, for the most part, it's just wasted, because again, why? It boils down to the basic question of why would they have such a powerful locomotive hauling such short trains. I mean, the acceleration must be insane. Or at the very least, rather quick. I mean, another example of overpowered commuter services could be the Music City Star. That's a service that runs from Nashville to Lebanon in Tennessee and has been running since 2006. And throughout its entire existence, the Star has used ex-Amtrak F40PHs, which haven't really been modified all that much, although I think last year all 4 of them were rebuilt and painted in that hideous, absolutely hideous purple and grey livery. And purple may work on MBTA engines, but it does not work on these ones out of Nashville. But no, those engines, I believe they're also about, the F40s, I'm pretty sure they're also about 3,000 horsepower. And that's another case where they're using such incredibly powerful engines on trains that are generally no longer than 3 coaches. Heck, the other week I was watching a video about the Music City Star after the ugly WeGo rebranding came in, and there was a clip of 2 F40s, but they were double heading on a. They had the same number of locomotives as they did coaches. Anyway, this is Canton Junction I'm passing through now, overtaking an ex-Stoughton service. But yeah, it's like, I mean, some of the aspects of the Music City Star are just really quite strange. Although I did read a YouTube comment once, or some sort of comment somewhere, where the person basically said the F40s were getting an easy retirement, and to an extent, they're kind of right. Like, just comparing how, especially when you compare just how different the operating environments are between Amtrak and like their long distance runs across like California or Montana, and then you just look at this humble and then compare that to the humble commuter service through Tennessee. Right, now we're coming up, getting very close to Route 128. I am going to try as hard as I can to avoid overshooting the platform. And in this instance, I'm not too worried about potentially being late, although that's pretty much a given at this point. One thing's for sure is that, unlike in real life, I doubt we're going to see anyone on the platform this time with cameras all ready to get a shot of this special livery. Well, actually, I've just thought, I know that the real ACS-64 number 662 is not meant to retain this livery for, like, permanently, and I think she will lose this special wrap in, like, a few months from the time of me recording this journey. But I'm wondering if this livery will actually stay in the game even after the real thing will have lost it. And when I say lost it, I don't mean Amtrak decided or noticed the engine went insane and put her in an asylum. Obviously not, but yeah. I mean, I still can't really get over it, how weirdly surreal it is that Dovetail Games, who is a very relatively small niche and sort of niche video game developer, partnered with a company as big as Amtrak, and they actually went as far as doing a proper sponsorship deal involving a locomotive. Because normally I would have expected to see this sort of thing on like just a coach or wagon. And I guess my hunch about the lack of foamers was right. Obviously in TSW they don't have the right sort of scripting in place to allow for those sorts of things. Although that would be pretty impressive since we're recreating this run that the real 662 carried out. It would be pretty impressive to see, like, if Dovetail had actually scripted in like proper models of like younger foamers here with their cameras and tripods and what have you. Actually, I think from what I saw in the real footage, they stopped a bit further down that platform. You certainly wouldn't have got those strange thing of passengers glitching through the doors. That's something that Dovetail ought to patch. Or they'll probably just gloss over it and try to distract people from the bugs by bringing out another wave of new DLC, as seems to be the case. Yeah, you lot do realise that there are other ways of getting out the station than crowding around a very tiny staircase. And also, you're supposed to be socially distanced and wearing a mask. Obviously sort of taking the piss there. I can tell, I know for a fact that this isn't meant to depict like pre-pandemic times. Jeez, I think just about everyone's absolutely fed up with this damn virus. I certainly am. Actually, I'm going to try and do a shave for a haircut before we try moving. I suppose that'll do. I think I might have said this before, but I feel like saying it again. Whilst I'm certainly quite impressed that this logo, this branding of all things, is actually on the real locomotive, I still think they should have also still kept this one, but done up another ACS-64 in an authentic recreation of the old Phase 3 livery, exactly like what the AEM-7s used to have. So as far as I can tell, the only thing here that's different is the silhouette of a city skyline, and obviously the 50th anniversary logo and the TSW advert. That is a Peter Gabriel. It inadvertently mentions a Peter Gabriel song. What else does it say? I should add, in case I just realised I've never really thought to say it, but I don't play TSW on consoles, and I only play it on PC. And from what I understand, you can't put mods on the console version, and more recently I've started to sort of mess around with mods in this game. One in particular that I got downloaded recently was a little texture patch for the Vossloch G6, which is a little German diesel shunter. Although, I mean, I say shunter, it can easily do mainline trips. Anyway, by default, the Vossloch G6 has no Vossloch branding at all, obviously due to licensing restrictions, and instead just has the Deutsche Bahn logo coming up on, this is Reedville Station. As I said earlier, it's where the 3-track section starts. But anyway, yeah, so by default, when you get the G6, it'll just have the DB logo. But then I think I got this from the Train Sim community website. I found a texture patch that swaps out the DB branding with the proper Vossloch logos. And to me, it certainly makes the G6 look a bit more authentic. And I don't even know whether or not any real G6s carry the DB logo, but from what I've seen, they certainly do just carry the basic Vossloch branding. Right, this station we're passing through now is, I believe this is Hyde Park. Not to be confused with the Hyde Park in London, of course. And then the next station we'll pass through is Forest Hills. Oh, well, we won't pass through, but we'll pass by. And despite being right next to the Northeast Corridor, the Providence / Stoughton and Franklin line trains do not stop there. The only ones that do, I think they go to and from Needham Heights, which I initially got confused with Needham Market, which I'm pretty sure is a railway station in England between Cambridge and King's Lynn. So we're about to pass another train, and it's yet another MBTA consist. That's the other thing. At some point in the future, I would certainly like to see more MBTA and Amtrak rolling stock added to this route, because whilst it is pretty good for the most part, I think that in some ways it's still rather boring when you just have the ACS-64s and Amfleet coaches, and then the rebuilt F40s and the single-decker coaches. It does look rather... It can certainly look a bit boring and formulaic, especially when in real life MBTA doesn't just uses a mix of double and single-decker coaches, to the point where you'll actually see, like, where it's not consistent within even each consist, because sometimes you'll see one that's got like it's got a certain number of double and single decker coaches in the same train, and it'll look rather silly. And so, in short, here's Dovetail. If you're watching, please consider and actually acting on adding the following rolling stock and motive power to this route. The MBTA HSP46 plus the bi-level coaches, and especially the Amtrak ACS-64, because they would help to make this route look a lot more realistic, and I certainly think it would be pretty popular. I mean, I'd probably snap it up on day one, or take a pre-order. But yeah, for the most part, I can't get past the somewhat boring rolling stock. And for the most part, yeah, generally I really do enjoy driving here on Boston Sprinter. And in all honesty, I think it's one of the best US routes ever made for TSW. As for the worst, sorry New Yorkers, but I think the worst route in TSW is Long Island Railroad. I'm not going to go into why I think that way, but if I remember to do so, I'll put, only if I remember, mind, because I often forget, but if I remember to do so, I'll put a link in the top right corner to a video where I drove the LIRR M3, and during the proceedings I do go over some of my thoughts on the add-on. But suffice to say, it's very dull and lifeless compared to the real thing. Right, now this is either Forest Hills or Ruggles. That's Ruggles, I think. Which actually, in real life, I'm pretty sure Ruggles now has a third platform. So this rendition of it is out of date. That's not to say I don't mind. That's not to say I don't mind these sorts of routes being set in the past. I mean, just look at Dresden to Chemnitz. That's generally a pretty good route, and that's set in 2012. And another one, I suppose, could to an extent be the Isle of Wight, even though that route itself is set in I think early 2020, but the Class 483 that comes with the route is actually in the wrong livery for the time period of the route, because it actually comes in Network Southeast colours. I think in terms of time period and how far back it's set, I think the oldest route in TSW, I'm guessing, is Northern Transpennine, which is set in 1983. Oh well, actually no, soon that'll be beaten out whenever that Liverpool to Crewe route is released, because that's the one that Dovetail's been hyping up as the spirit of steam. In other words, the spirit of Peter Gabriel. And that'll be, well, from what I understand, that'll be set in 1968 and include the LMS Stania Jubilee and the Stania 8F. Seriously, Dovetail, surely you could have gone for something more interesting than a bloody jub and an 8F. It's just, I mean, I'm surprised they didn't go for the Black 5. That would have probably been one of the laziest choices they could go for. I mean, as almost like a starter level steam era route, they could have done like the branch line from Axminster to Lyme Regis and put in the Adams radial tanks. Now that would be something that would certainly be a sight to behold. since the Adams radial tanks were retired in 1961. I mean, like, but just thinking, like, to me, Liverpool to Crewe just sounds like such a boring choice for a route. And of course, it has to be set in BR days, because doing something like, I don't know, an unrebuilt Patriot in LMS Crimson Lake, like Crewe to Derby or something, or whatever routes the Patriots ran on, like LMS Crimson Lake Patriot and like Fowler 4P tank. Like, that would have been so much more interesting than boring old BR black and green. And I mean, that's not to say they're bad liveries and a bad era. Well, I mean, it probably was a bad era, especially for Steam. But it's like a song you don't like that is constantly played on a radio station that you often listen to. It's like, it's not necessarily, I mean, in some cases the songs might not be all that bad, but you hear or see them so many times that it's just like you want to tell it to piss off. I mean, I'm not even sure if I don't even think I'll get Spirit of Steam. Even though, of course, oh wow, steam locomotives and trains in world at last, but I'm sorry. Crewe to Liverpool in the late 60s with engines only in BR colours, and they're both LMS Stania designs. That is just not my cup of tea. I mean, I'd probably prefer something like a secondary route, like in southern England, like actually set in the days of the Southern Railway and not the cop-out BR era. I mean, you could do like Dovetail should have done something like Southampton to Weymouth, plus the Lymington branch and Castleman's Corkscrew in southern days with a Lord Nelson, like I don't know, a Lord Nelson 460, Drummond M7 tank, perhaps a bullied Q1 or bullied Pacifics. Now this is something I wouldn't mind seeing in TSW, even though I think they're hideous. Unrebuilt Merchant Navy Pacifics, specifically number 21C1 channel packet, in her original 1940 or 1941 condition. Even though, as I say, I think the unrebuilt Merchant Navies are hideous. But I mean, that's just my initial thoughts on this Spirit of Steam palaver. So I'm not telling you how to think about it for yourself. You can more than welcome to share your own thoughts on the DLC or on the upcoming DLC in the comments. Even though I know that there's bound to be at least one person who will fight to the death to try and defend the route and try to say that you can't make any negative comments on this route or that sort of thing. Right. And after all that time, we've gone through basically the whole route quicker than I was expecting, and we're already passing through East Limits Cove interlocking. Why can't they just call it a junction? Like, why do the Americans always have to insist on using the term interlocking? Yeah, I do apologise if I'm sounding a bit angrier than usual. I've got some other crap going on outside of YouTube that is doing my head in. And suffice to say, I hate Valentine's Day. And to quote the Supertramp's song, you've got a bloody right to say. And no, I wasn't trying to play the notes of that, try and play that tune on the horn, or on the horn, Get another attempt at a shave and a haircut. As for why I hate Valentine's Day, hold on, I'll just try to count the words in my head. Yeah, 5 words. Still single at 21. That's all I'll say on that matter. Anyway, here is Boston. This is Boston South, which is the northern terminus of the Northeast Corridor, and is also served by, well, the terminus for several MBTA lines, like obviously Providence / Stoughton, the Franklin line, and I think even the trains to Worcester. The Worcester, do you call it the Worcester line? Either way, yeah, the Worcester services also depart from this station. And the country end of these platforms being covered by what I think were some sort of retail buildings or offices or whatever reminds me of London Liverpool Street, and how that's especially how that station is today, and to a lesser extent Euston. Right, it should be fairly easy to get the stopping point right here. Of course, the hangabout is a pair of ACS-64s. Apparently that consists, apparently if you see the double-headed ACS-64s, that's meant to represent the Lakeshore Limited. Don't quote me on that. By the way, that stutter was not deliberate. Like, sometimes that just happens to me and I've got no idea why. I mean, it's sort of like, if you've ever seen the British sitcom Open All Hours, the character, or the shopkeeper Arkwright, played by Ronnie Barker, he'll sometimes say something like, what is it? Yeah, it was something like, he's like, says to a shop assistant, Granville, how do you spell pear? Or, what was the other one? Or was it paper? I don't know, but then he said, is it 6 P's or 7? Anyway, by the way, I reckon you should go and watch Open All Hours and other older British comedy programs like Dad's Army and Are You Being Served and Heidi High. What's one that's not written by Jimmy Perry or David Croft? Oh, Last of the Summer Wine, specifically, but no later than season 6. Especially since in one episode of Last of the Summer Wine features a Great Western pannier tank steam locomotive, the same one that was in the 1970s Railway Children film. But anyway, I think I've been rambling for far too long now, and I think it's best I just end the video here, especially now that throughout this whole run we've been, to quote the Travelling Wilburys, going to the end of the line. But yeah, I do hope that you've enjoyed this run tonight. Well, it's not night time when I'm recording this, but regardless, I do hope that you've found this run interesting, and hope that you've enjoyed seeing Amtrak 662 again. And yeah, I think that's all I've really got to say for now. So yeah, until next time, take care, and thank you very much for watching.